I had the good fortune of knowing my great-grandmother. I was 8 years old when she died, and I have a lot of significant memories about her. One of the things she used to tell us when we were young, the great-grandchildren and the grandchildren and all the cousins, was she would say, "Don't you dare putting on airs. You're no better than anybody else. You understand that? What makes us extraordinary is not just ourselves, but that we are loved by God. And everybody is loved by God. So don't go thinking you're any better than anybody else." Well, she would tell us about being that ordinary. And then her son-in-law, my grandfather, would tell the most extraordinary stories. Now, I wouldn't call my grandfather a liar, but he never let the facts get in the way of a good story. And he told me so many stories, I could not recount all of them tonight, but just bear with me on a couple. One is he told about my Uncle Johnny, who back in the day was a bus monitor on his elementary school bus. It was a great honor for a fifth grader to have. But back in those days, you stood on the steps of the bus while it was moving to be the bus monitor. And one day he fell off and broke both his legs. But as a young person, he healed quickly. And as my grandfather used to say, he said, and he even played on the high school football team. But you see, the town in the hills of Kentucky where my Uncle Johnny grew up was so small that if you could walk, you got on the football team. And he often liked to tell his own personal story, which he thought was quite extraordinary. He was born in the hills of Tennessee, and he grew up, and he was a dirt poor farmer to begin with. And then he worked in a lumber mill. And then he got to be a glazier, working with glass. And after that, he became a certified union welder and did that job till he retired. But in the meantime, in his part-time, he was called to be a Methodist minister in a little small town in Kentucky. If I've learned anything about preaching, I hope I learned as well as he did. But he used to tell all about those stories. But the most extraordinary one he told me was not about himself, was not about my cousins or uncles. It was about my great-grandmother, his mother-in-law. You see, she was growing up in the hills of Tennessee too. And she was very young when she got married. And one night her husband came home and beat her up. And so she left him. Now, back in those days in the hills of Tennessee, you didn't do that. People just told you to put up with it. And she wasn't going to put up with it. She left. And soon afterwards found out she was pregnant. And she gave birth to a young girl. And in the meantime, this woman, this single woman, carried on and farmed cotton on 7 acres and raised chickens so she'd have eggs and meat, and had her own little garden with a lot of potatoes to last her through the winter. And when that daughter grew up and met my grandfather and they wanted to get married, she made it very, very clear to him that this was a package deal. Her daughter didn't come alone, she came along. And so my great-grandmother came along when they all went up to Kentucky to serve that Methodist church. And she raised a family with my grandparents of 9 kids. 9 kids. And they still farmed. And they still had chickens. My gosh, they had chickens till I went to college. I remember. She was an extraordinary woman. And I think what made her extraordinary was that love of God she talked about. She would say, "No, I'm no better than anybody else. We're all loved by God." And I think it's because she knew that she could do the extraordinary things she did. When I think about this gospel that we just read, We often talk about that line, well, a prophet is not without honor except in his own hometown. That's the one we concentrate on. But the one that hit me is the one, and he could do no miracles there because of their lack of faith. He could do no miracles because all they saw was the ordinary. Isn't this Jesus, the carpenter? Isn't his mother with us? Aren't his brothers with us? Aren't his sisters with us? Who does he think he is saying all this stuff? My guess is that there had been a baker in Nazareth where they would have said, well, he's just the baker. If there had been a farmer in Nazareth, they would say, well, he's just the farmer. If there had been a tailor in Nazareth, they'd say, well, he's just the tailor. Yeah, no better than anybody else. Don't put on airs. You're just an ordinary person. But what makes us extraordinary is that every last one of us is loved by God. And when we live out of that love, then extraordinary things happen. A single mother in a community that tells her she shouldn't be raises a child, raises cotton, raises potatoes, raises chickens, makes a life for herself, and becomes the head of a household. Make no mistake, we all knew, but before she died, who ran that house? It was my great-grandmother. She was in charge. And when we know that love of God that makes us extraordinary, and some amazing things begin to happen. Like lepers get cleansed. Demoniacs are rescued and saved from the demons and brought back in the community and given a message to proclaim. The dead are raised. Those who languish in illness are healed. And all become together again a community, a family even, where even in our ordinariness, our everydayness, when we know the love of God, we do absolutely extraordinary things. Amen.